Hi everybody, this is FIDE Master Dennis Monokroussos, and our quick Ruy Lopez series continues now. We're up to episode 17, and it's the fifth, I think, episode on the Open Ruy, the fourth dealing with main lines. So let's go ahead and get to our starting position here, at least for the variations in question. This is the Ruy, of course. This is the Open Ruy, and this is the basic tabia of the Open Ruy Lopez. This is really the starting position where white starts making fundamental decisions. In episode 14, we looked at Keres' move, queen to e2, which has the idea of rook to d1 followed by c4. In episode 15, we examined bishop to e3, kind of a useful waiting move. So not really committing, or trying not to commit too much, and also the move is geared to some extent against bishop to c5, although that can be played as well, as we've seen. And then this time, and the last episode saw knight b to d2. Alright, from here, knight to c5 is the main move. And after c3, d4, we spent most of the time last video looking at Igor Zaitsev's brilliant knight to g5. So eventually this move was kind of figured out, and there was a piece sack line that we saw that enabled black to hold the balance. And in fact, black seems to be doing pretty well there, but it's very, very complicated. Black certainly needs to know a lot to reach a playable position. But if he does know it, then he's in great shape. So the main move, and it had been the main move before Zaitsev's idea as well, is bishop takes e6. Before we get into this, though, I want to discuss some other options for black instead of d4, and to mention them only to push them off till next time. So black can also play bishop to e7. And here white generally plays bishop to c2, and now black either plays d4 or bishop to g4. Alternatively, black can play bishop to g4, and after bishop c2, bishop to d7, or bishop to e7, excuse me. White will often play rook to e1, for instance. But all of this I'm going to push off till next time, because these are positions that transpose into c3 variations. So for instance, c3, bishop e7, knight b to d2, black can castle here or play knight to c5, and after bishop c2, there's d4 or bishop to g4, what we just looked at. And here, okay, white can play rook to e1, and so on. So this will be for next time. c3 is a very rich complex, so bishop to e7 is one move. Okay, knight to c5 can also be played. All right, that can also transpose to things we're looking at now. And certainly bishop to c5 is a very, very fun variation that we'll spend some time on. So I think the c3 lines will probably require at least a couple of shows. And then we can move on. But let's get back to knight b to d2. So knight c5, c3, d4, bishop takes e6, knight e6, c takes d4, knight c takes d4. And this variation has been around for a long, long time. I believe it was Capablanca who actually was on the white side of this many, many years ago. Obviously, this is the post-war period, or sorry, pre-war period, pre-World War II, and it probably wasn't even that long after World War I when Capablanca had this. It might have even been in New York 1924, although I'm not positive about that. But I do remember that this variation goes back a long, long way. Also, it occurred in a couple of the Karpov-Korchnoi match games in 1981, if I remember right. Anyway, it's been around for a long, long time. And here white has two main moves. There's knight to e4, going for piece play. It's a very aggressive approach. And the alternative is a4. And here white is trying to soften up the black queen side a bit before determining what exactly he's going to do with his pieces in the next stage of the game. They're roughly equal in popularity. Maybe a4 is a touch more common, but they're both major lines. And if you play the Open Ruy, you definitely will want to know this, at least if you play d4 in this position. So if you play d4 here, you certainly have to know both a4 and knight to e4. All right, well, let's jump into knight e4. From here, black plays bishop e7, bishop e3, knight f5, queen c2. And here you might wonder, well, why not play knight takes e3? This looks really, really great. We mess up the white pawns. Well, this in fact will occur, but not yet. And the reason we don't want to do it yet is because of queen to c6 check. Black can't interpose with the queen because it would hang the rook in the corner, and king f8 is not really much fun either. It's certainly better than losing a rook, But after king f8, f takes e3, the king is poorly placed, the f file is open, and black's rook is stuck on h8. So this would be just a very good position for white. He would have a big advantage. So black castles here, and now white has a choice between three moves. The main move by a pretty long way is rook a to d1, but there are two alternatives that you might not be so familiar with. One that I definitely was unaware of is knight to f6 check. It's kind of a fun move to play, and it also prevents black from getting in this knight takes e3 idea. Bishop takes f6, queen f5, bishop b7, rook f to d1, queen c8. And it looks, at first sight, as if white should be really very happy with this position. His pieces are all much more forwardly placed than black's. The pawn on e5 looks rather aggressive too. But it's hard for white to really convert this slight space advantage, or this space advantage with his pieces, into something tangible. Meanwhile, black will play rook to d8, swap a pair of rooks, play c5, expand on the queen side, and essentially ask white, well, what's your big idea? The g5 square is very well controlled, so putting pieces on g5 would just lead to exchanges. And the e5 pawn doesn't really do an awful lot either. I mean, if white could play f4, f5, well, that would be one thing, but it's going to take a long time for white to get all the pieces out of that pawn's way in the hopes of drumming up some kingside plays. So black really seems to be doing all right. For instance, rook a to c1, rook to d8, rook takes d8, queen takes d8, queen e4, and now c5. So this gives black a nice chunk of space over on the queen side, and after b3, rook to a7 is also a nice move, enabling the rook to transfer to the center of the board. And although white's cluster of pieces in the center looks nice, I think black is just fine here. He's equal, and results confirm this as well, this verdict of equality. So knight f6 check. I mean, it looks like a lot of fun, but it doesn't really seem to get anywhere. A bit more dangerous is knight e to g5. And okay, black should be at least marginally careful here, at least show enough care to not play knight takes e3 and get mated with queen h7. That would not be good. So what black should make a capture on g5 with either the knight or the bishop. If bishop takes g5, I think white has some chances for a small edge at this point. Knight takes g5, and again, of course, not knight takes e3 because of the mate on h7. So black ought to play either g6 or h6. Now, if g6, then I think white could get a very small edge by just exchanging here. Although I kind of like the black position here. That knight is very good, but the problem for black is that it's difficult for him to achieve c5 now. And without that, he's at least kind of functionally maybe down half a pawn. Although, to be fair, white's kingside majority isn't going anywhere anytime soon either. The d5 square is a very nice strong point. Maybe the knight will move to e7 and d5 in some cases. So if white has an edge here, it's very, very small. Probably a bit more promising is knight to e4. But after knight e3, fe3, it's not that big. I'm sorry, white does have an edge. So it's not tremendous, but f6 is a nice square. The f file does have some meaning. And yeah, I mean, it's just easier to play for white as well. So the rook comes to the d file, maybe queen to c6 in some cases. And it also appears that c5 might not be good. I think white could probably just take on c5 there. All right. So for this reason, I think it would be better for black to play h6 and not weaken the dark squares on the king side. After knight e6, knight e3 is a good move. Okay, queen e4 is also a good move. Fe, queen e3, queen d5, rook f to d1, queen c6, rook a to c1. And it looks like white is pushing black around, but now rook a to d8, I think, really keeps black in fair shape. So takes, g3, making luft here, queen b7, and now b4. So the c pawn does not get to c5. And that's very important in the open Rui. There are a lot of variations where if black can achieve c5 and nothing bad is happening to him, he's equal. Maybe even better than equal in some cases. All right, after rook to d7, maybe h4 is good. A little further luft for the white king, and also in some cases preparing a general advance on with the kingside pawns, aiming to make some further weaknesses over there in black's position. But after queen to d5, I mean, black, I think, is sufficiently active here that white's edge is minuscule at best. it's something. You can play the position, you can keep playing with white, no problem. But it's not a big deal, that's all. But it's absolutely playable. Anyway, I think white has the slimmest of edges here in this line with bishop takes g5 after knight e to g5. But I think that knight takes g5 should equalize. Bishop takes g5. If bishop g5, queen f5 probably is slightly better for white. So g6 is, I think, correct. Rook a to d1, queen e8. And in a game between Mickey Adams and Vitaly Golod, played in, I think, the Bundesliga in 2011, Adams played g4. And after knight to g7, bishop h6. Now, this looks very appealing for white. I mean, this bishop is well placed. The knight looks a little bit silly on g7. As usual, white has this extra space that he can play with, but it's a bit misleading once again. After queen c8, hitting the g-pawn, queen e4, now c5, I think black has enough room. Adams played knight to g5, and now Golod just traded and played queen to e6. The idea is to play f7, f5. G takes f5 would be unappealing, and e takes f6 would hang the queen. And let's say rook to d5, which is... no, that's not what happened in the game. Yeah, Golod played something other than bishop takes g5 here. And he was still probably okay, but he lost in a long battle. He lost in 84 moves. But here, in this position, black is equal, according to Golod, and I think he's right. So once again, black is okay. He's going to put the knight on e6, let's say after a trade of queens, so something like queen f5, rook f5, bishop moves, and then knight to e6, and black should have no problems at all. Alright, so the conclusion, at least at the moment, is that knight e to g5 does not offer white an advantage, but I think it's still probably early days for that, for the variation, and there may well be some new ideas that are available. Alright, so let's turn to the main line with rook a to d1. This time around, black will take on e3. So finally it's safe. F takes e3, queen c8. And now there are at least 3 moves that white can try and has tried. And actually, there are at least 5 moves that have been tried, but I'm only going to talk about 3 of them. So one move which I'm not going to say a great deal about is rook to d3, in part because it's just a rather inoffensive move. It allows black to play what he wants, and that's c5. So there we go. The thematic advance. Then the pawn's going to go to c4, then black will put a piece on c5, and he should have no problems whatsoever. The knight could come into d6, but this is just nothing. Queen c7. And the knight looks nice, but it performs no important function here. And after c4, yeah, c4, and maybe just putting a rook on d8 as well, it doesn't seem to be a big deal. Alternatively, white can double, but after c4 again, there's just nothing happening. If the rook goes to d5, no big deal. Bishop c5, black is equal. If the rook goes to d7, same thing. If the rook goes back to d2, maybe bishop c5 is okay here as well, but knight c5 is pretty good too. The point of this being that if white avoids the knight exchange, the knight may just drop into d3 and clog up both rooks. Potentially, anyway. Yeah, because then if knight e1, then it hangs the e5 pawn. Alright, so in sum, then rook to d3 is really no big deal. But there are 2 very interesting moves that absolutely need a careful look. Knight to d4 is the main line, and then the knights get swapped, queen e6, and we'll come back to this momentarily. White plays knight to g3. Anyway, we'll get back to this. But the alternative here is h3. And you might wonder, what in the world is the idea of this move? I mean, with the f-pawn on e3 now, it's not as if white's going to get back rank mated. Black's queen didn't really look like it was about to go to g4. There's certainly no pin. There's no light square bishop that would go to g4 either. What's the idea? Well, you might want to take a moment and try to figure out why in the world white is playing h3. I mean, is it just a pass move? Is it a high-class waiting move? All right, well, let's go on. Black plays rook to d8 in this position. And now we see the idea. Knight h2. So it's very sneaky. I mean, h3 looks just so innocuous, meaningless even. But white's plan is to not exchange this knight, but to use it as an attacking piece. And after rook d1, queen d1, we've got a position that's occurred in quite a few games, including 2 games of Mikhail Tal's back in the 80s. So both games white won. In one case, he was black and lost to Efim Geller. That was in '86. And in the other game, he beat Viktor Korchnoi with white in in 1987. All right, the Giller tall game went like this: Knight c5, Queen f3, threatening f7, Queen e8, and now Knight to g3. And that's the thing about this system. In fact, let's just go back to here. I mean, White's pieces find very promising squares. The queen can come to f3, sometimes g4, most likely h5. Let me do it like this. This knight can come to g4. This knight can come to g3, and from there to f5 or h5. Maybe even in some position go to f6. Okay, the rook is beautifully placed on the f file. Maybe in some position it will lift up to f3 and over to g3. That could be a possibility too. The e pawn maybe helps in a supporting role with control of the f6 square. So White, I mean, is really, I think, kind of clustered very nicely here. He's got that weak pawn on, well, he's got the double pawns. I shouldn't say they're weak. So that is a small factor. But in the meantime, Black really has to be very careful. I mean, all of the White pieces, I mean, he's going to have 5 attacking units over there. And it's not so easy for Black to just transfer everything to the defense. Okay, so the Giller tall game went like this: Knight c5, Queen f3, Queen e8, and now Knight to g3. Not exchanging. Rook to d8, Knight to g4, Knight e6, Knight f5. And you can see, I mean, it's very difficult for Black to just resolve the situation. I mean, he can put his pieces on okay squares. I mean, he can bring them back over to the king side. He has a fair degree of freedom of movement, but what he lacks here is a way to really kind of force the issue. I mean, he can't just grab a hold of the White pieces and exchange them off. He just has to react at this point and hope maybe that he can keep everything under control. Someday advance his queenside, but that's a ways off. All right, tall played king to h8, getting out of the way of maybe any knight h6 or knight f6 tricks. And here Giller just cashed in, and the result was this very slightly better rook ending. All right, White's up a pawn. It's not the best pawn in history, but it's not nothing. And indeed, Giller did go on to win in a longish game. So he won in 27 more moves, 57 moves in total. And I would say that he is slightly better at this point, that Black's compensation for the pawn is not fully adequate. All right, so going back here, instead of Tall's knight to c5, Korchnoi against Tall a year later in Reykjavik. Oh, the Giller's Tall game is from Sochi 1986, in case you want to look that up. Anyway, so Tall Korchnoi from Reykjavik 87 went queen e8. And here, White has several possibilities. I think knight to g4 could be played. Knight to g3 could be played. Tall himself played queen to h5 here. Knight c5, again hoping to trade. And of course, White's not going to do that. And here I think Korchnoi found a very good defensive idea. a5, and then rook to a6. So the rook helping out on the 6th rank definitely is quite useful. So now, for instance, knight to g4, knight f6 ideas are at least much more difficult to execute on account of the rook's participation. So I think Black is objectively okay here, but Tall managed to win this game too. Like the Giller game, this was a win for White in 57 moves. So that's the problem with this for Black. I mean, it's objectively okay, but it's a lot easier for White to play this. It's a lot more fun. It's a lot easier. You really have to be very patient with Black here to hang on in such a position and avoid trouble for a long, long time. Anyway, while it's less popular, it's worth your time to examine this. And if you play the system with Black, you should not only know it, but I think play enough blitz games and maybe test it with the computer on both sides to really develop a feel for it, so you kind of know what you're doing when you're in a tournament game in that kind of position. All right, well, on to the main line, knight to d4. So Black trades, plays queen e6 to impede d5, and of course just to bring the queen back into the game. Now, from here, White generally plays knight to g3, and this is the critical move. But we should, of course, ask and answer the question, well, why not take the pawn on c7? All right, the answer is this: rook a to c8, queen a5, rook c2. And Black has good play here. Now, White should play rook to f2, because if he plays rook to d2, then after rook to c4, Black is gaining a tempo on account of the threat of bishop to b4. So rook to f2 is more accurate. Queen g4 hitting the knight and the rook. Queen e1 defends both. Bishop to b4 hits the queen. Knight c3. takes, takes, and now f6. And here black has sufficient compensation for the pawn. And indeed, white often just gives it back. For instance, e6, rook e8, and like king to g1 could be played here. White should absolutely not be greedy, though, with d5. This would be a terrible move, and black would win after bishop c5 check. So the white king is not going to make it home to the corner. And after king f1, queen f5 check, king e2, b4. Okay, knight a4 just hangs the knight because of queen to c2. Whoops, not a4 with the pawn. Knight a4. So queen c2 just wins. All right, knight to b1 then. Queen to e4 check. And here, white is going to lose the d pawn and then the e pawn and just get shelled. For example, king f1, queen f4, king e2, queen e3, king f1, and now queen g1. So this drives the king to e2, and now finally it has to go to the d file, and then black picks up this pawn with a winning advantage. Somewhat similarly is the immediate king to d2. This is just a one pawn better version of the same thing. Queen d5. Okay, if the king goes to the e file, rook e6, and if the king goes to the c file, then queen c4 check, and white loses the knight. All right, so that means that after e6, rook e8, d5 is no good, off limits. All right, e takes f6 is playable though. Rook f6, check, king g1, rook e6, and black has very good compensation, but probably not an advantage objectively speaking. So I'd rather probably play black here, but it's still anybody's game. Okay, so this is certainly not promising white any advantage to play queen takes c7. So the main move is knight to g3. And here black plays most of the time c6, defending the pawn, and also shoring up the d5 square in anticipation of white later on trying to play d4, d5 himself. Okay, knight f5, posting up the knight, rook f to e8, preparing bishop to f8. And here white has tried various moves. He's played a3, for instance, to avoid queen takes a2. Sometimes greed is good. Sometimes white does grab the bishop. And I would say the main move here is rook to d3. And after bishop to f8, I think white still has some chances for an edge, but black is solid. And again, just to mention some of the possibilities here, there's a3, there's rook to g3, there's rook to h3, threatening knight e7 check with mate in at most two moves. And, well, I would just say have at it. I mean, this is really the place to look. And there's no clear consensus. I mean, that's the thing. White has tried all of these moves, but none of them is kind of the overwhelming choice. None of them proves some kind of clear advantage. So you'll have to dig in yourself. I've taken you to move 23 here, so from there you'll have to work it out on your own in this variation. All right, and some of those lines went to move 32, so I've done my duty as far as that goes. All right, so back to here. Instead of knight to e4, as I said, white has also played a4, and this is another important continuation. Okay, from here, black has tried three moves with the bishop, bishop to e7, bishop to c5, and the main move, I would say, bishop to b4. Okay, let's dispose of bishop to c5 first. I think this one does promise white an advantage. So knight to e4, bishop b6, and now knight f to g5. And I think it's safe to say that white is already slightly better here without too much ado. Okay, bishop to e7 I think is a better choice. After knight takes d4, black has recaptured both ways. So queen takes d4, ab, queen e5, ba6, castles, and now both knight f3 and queen to a4 have been played, and I think white has done pretty well here. So I'm not sure that I would really recommend this either. Knight takes d4 looks more natural. Knight e4, castles. The problem, though, is that now after a takes b5, black cannot recapture with the pawn because rook a8 and then the knight on d4 would hang. So he's got to take back with the knight, and we'll see this kind of recapture as well. And after bishop e3, queen c8, queen c2, queen e6, f4. White should be a little bit better here. I mean, for no other reason than that black has two slight queenside weaknesses to white's one. So I like white's center. I mean, his pieces look good. I don't know that it's a huge advantage, of course, but I would prefer to have white here. And so bishop to e7 is okay, but the main move, as I said, is bishop to b4. All right, well, white takes on b5, and now black doesn't take with the pawn here, but plays knight takes b5. Alright, it looks like a really ugly move, but surprisingly the black pieces are pretty active and it works out okay. Sometimes queen to b3 is played, but the main move is queen to a4. And now black should give up the bishop with bishop takes d2. If he plays bishop to e7, I think white is in very good shape after knight to c4. Maybe even clearly better in this position. So it's an untried suggestion, but it looks like a good one. So untried suggestion by me. Knight e4 is the move that's been played. Certainly this isn't bad either. Here black is castled, and after rook to d1, I think white's clearly better here too. Probably a better move is another untried suggestion, knight e to d4. After rook d1, takes, queen c8, knight g3, castles, white plays queen to g4, and I think stands better, but only slightly better. Still, I think all of this is good reason to not play bishop to e7. I mean, if you wanted to play bishop to e7, you could have done it 2 moves ago, or 3 moves ago. So, take on d2. Alright, bishop d2, castles, and here white generally plays rook f to d1 and bishop to e3. Sometimes the one comes first, sometimes the other. I don't think there's really much by way of independent significance here. So rook f to d1, c5, bishop e3. Now, Victor Michalewski is one of the great experts on the Open Rui. He's played it very faithfully for well over a decade, and he's had a couple of games here. So a 2009 game against Yakovenko, played in Novi Sad, and a 2010 game against Nadezhda Kozantseva, the very strong female Russian grandmaster. Not women's grandmaster, but regular grandmaster. So very, very talented young lady. Anyway, in that game, Michalewski played queen to b6. And white seems to be better, slightly better after either h4 or h3 as in the game. And it went knight b to c7, hitting the b pawn, so rook to d2, rook a to d8, rook a to d1, takes. Okay, now if h6, white plays knight h4, which is a common motif, especially when black plays h6. So the knight's going to go to f5, and because the pawn's on h6, black can't play g6 to restrict it, as it would drop the pawn. So that's kind of the little game there between those two units. Queen to b5 is played in the game. Okay, queen c2. And now the knight on e6 is kind of stuck because of knight to g5. That would be a very unpleasant move to meet. So Michalewski played h6 and Kozantseva played knight h4 with a slight advantage. And in fact, she went on to win the game. And not in the near future, not anytime soon, but ground out the point. And again, I mean, white has some very nice advantages. The minor pieces are a little bit more active, and black has the 2 queenside pawn weaknesses to white's 1. Alright, so that was queen to b6 in this position. Against Yakovenko, we played queen to e7. But white's probably slightly better here after queen to e4, although not a big edge. I suspect this may be more reliable than queen to b6. Alright, here rook f to d8 is possible. On this, white can either play g3 or trade rooks and then play g3 or h4, some Luft move. And again, it's just fundamentally a long-term advantage for white. The a6 pawn is under attack now that there's no back rank mate, and black is going to be a little bit more passive in every case. Alright, Michalewski played h6 against Yakovenko. Yakovenko played h4, rook f to e8, and here I forget what Yakovenko did. My suggestion would be to play queen g4 here, threatening bishop h6. Okay, if knight b to d4, you can just take, and while black has ruined, or is not ruined, but damaged the white pawn structure, and can also play something like knight to d4, not right here, obviously, because of mate and 1, but at some point in the future, white's extra pawn and kingside chances matter for something, so I would again prefer to have white. Alright, so king h8 I think is more sensible, and here, okay, if rook to a4, I think black equalizes with knight b to d4. So takes, and for instance rook d7, rook e7, and this should be fairly dead. Alright, instead of rook to a4 then, an interesting try is knight to d2. Again, black gets to put this knight on d4, and this really shows the point or kind of the fundamental idea behind black capturing on b5 with the knight way back when, so way back here. So you're still going to keep good control over the d4 square, and kind of gets to be flexible about when he goes back. Alright, so here, knight e to d4, knight c4, f5 is an interesting try. I think this is all suggestions suggested by Michalewski. f4, bishop takes d4, knight takes d4. And here I think white is slightly better after queen to g4. Again, not a big deal, but all the usual things I think count. So the f4 pawn is slightly weak. Of course, it can't be taken right away because of knight e2 check. And the a6 and c5 pawns can be a bit of a problem. And even black's kingside is slightly vulnerable too. So putting all of that together, I think white has a very small edge, certainly enough to play on. It's a playable position for black, no doubt, but I think there's still some burden of proof left on black in this variation. Okay, so I think that'll do it. That pretty well covers everything I want to say about knight b to d2, except for lines that will transpose into 9c3 variations. So we'll see those next time, as well as bishop to c5, probably the show after that. So I'll take care of all the hybrid lines in the next episode, and then get to the distinctively c3 variations afterwards. And they're very, very exciting. I think those will really be a lot of fun. All right, so hope you enjoy it, and I will see you next time. Bye-bye.